We're live. This is the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board meeting. It is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026 at 3 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle.
Present.
Brown.
Present.
Fasella.
Present.
Friedman.
Here.
Nudo.
Present.
Ula. Barnes.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the board on any topic? Apparently not. Hearing none, we're going to move on next to the agenda item, next agenda item that is. Is there a motion to approve the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board meeting minutes from January 28th, 26th, open session?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to communications. Are there any communications?
We have to approve a closed session.
Oh, pardon me. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board meeting minutes from January 28th, 2026, closed session?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to communications. Are there any communications from the board? Hearing none. Next is the Managing Director's report. Carl?
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is a report on the January statistics, January of 2026. The total ridership for that month was 845,527, which was a sliver of a 0.8% increase over the same month last year. And the year-to-date ridership is a bit stronger, holding at just under 5% over the fiscal year-to-date from FY 2025. The monthly operating revenue was 1.2% above January of 2025, and year-to-date operating revenue was 0.1% above FY 2025. The operating expenses were 1.7% above January of 2025, and the year-to-date operating expenses were 2.5% above 2025. The year-to-date operating revenues were $1.3 million above budget, and the operating expenses were $2.9 million below budget. And, excuse me, sorry?
I think we've hit kind of a plateau. Do you think we've hit kind of a plateau?
In terms of ridership?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think we're getting closer to a plateau, but we are still seeing healthy increase. An increase of nearly 5% over the year-to-date is healthy. It's certainly not the big percentages that we were previously seeing post-pandemic. Yeah, I think we're headed for a plateau, but we're not quite there yet. I think February will be a little more of a January oftentimes can be an outlier month because the university is essentially shut down, so we lose the students. Many faculty and staff members aren't going to work for chunks, or early chunks at least, of January, and so I don't think that you should get too caught up on January numbers. Okay, moving on with that, I wanted to point out that we have have begun the process of accepting Medicaid trips for the C-Cart service, the rural service that we operate for Champaign County. And we think that this not only will be, George, an infusion of ridership, that doesn't impact MTD ridership, but it impacts Champaign County C-Cart's ridership. But these are trips that if people are on Medicare or Medicaid, then Medicare or Medicaid pays for the trip for them. And so that actually, they pay a higher rate than what we charge the passenger, and because everybody knows, some people understand and some people don't like, but public transit is subsidized, and so the passenger doesn't pay the full fare or the full cost of a trip. With these Medicaid trips, Medicaid does actually pay the full cost of the trip. So that's really good for C-Carts and actually can help them pay for additional service to residents of the county. So I think this is a really good scenario. The newer software system that we use to schedule the trips has a component that it does the billing for Medicaid automatically, and so there's very little staff work that needs to go into this, which is one of the reasons why we've held off for years, just because C-Carts didn't have the staff to accommodate it. But now that we have the software that does it, it should be a relatively light lift for the for C-Carts. Yes.
So, yeah, I read this. It's very interesting about this being available. Is this something that you learned about from meetings you've been to, or that you've known about all along and you didn't have the software, or how did you come about getting to where we are right now?
Excuse me, it's really the latter. This has been available for quite a while, and I have not been interested in pursuing it, primarily because 10 to 15 years ago, when this was happening, systems would be in arrears for sometimes years. That the Medicaid payments were years behind. And so it actually created financial problems for the transit systems because they weren't getting any fares, but they were racking up all these expenses, and they couldn't recoup the expenses for years down the road. It caused issues with auditing, it caused issues with cash flow, and so when we took over C-Carts, I said now's not the time to do that, because C-Carts already operates on a pretty shoestring budget, and so I didn't want to risk their financial situation, and I didn't think it was appropriate for MTD to be subsidizing C-Carts, or actually subsidizing Medicaid in that case. So, simultaneously, when we got the software that made it easier to keep up on this, the Medicaid system, the state got Medicaid up to date and has kept it up to date, and so I think the risk is still there, but I think it's a much lower risk, and so it just seemed like a good time to give it a shot. Yes.
So, part two, how hard is it to fill out that component by the person who's filling out that to make an appointment ride? And how long does it take for them to do it? Is it a motivating thing to get it done in a couple of minutes, or is it, 10 pages of information?
Yeah, that's an insightful question, because the government programs can be difficult to navigate, and so I don't know what the process is that an individual has to go through to be eligible for Medicaid. That's something that they do, but once they are being eligible for a trip paid for by Medicaid is pretty easy. That's not a heavy lift for them.
So you know, I think this is a part of our core mission to take care of, you know, have a safety net for people who really do need this service of transportation. And I don't know if there are organizations that have worked with Medicaid people that have transportation needs and they could assist us to get things going, or if it's something, I mean, an outreach kind of a thing that we could work with people, not only those signing up for rides, but those who are working with low-income people, that we could ask them to get that as a part of their component to get transportation set up to them free. And I think this is a really exciting thing. I'm glad you said insightful, because that's the first time you've ever said, Alan, that's insightful.
It may be the first time I said it out loud, Alan, but I think it all the time, so I apologize. I haven't said it out loud more frequently. I believe, but I can check on this because I'm not positive, but I believe Medicaid is who will communicate to their recipients that they are, if they are eligible for these trips. But we can look into that.
Carl,
Yes.
are we doing anything to fill the gap left when that little rural transit district went out of business? I can't think of the name of it, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
We are not directly involved with that. That is all constrained to Vermilion County. And so IDOT, the Illinois Department of Transportation, the city of Danville, and Vermilion County are the entities that are responsible for that and making really good strides in getting those trips covered. I will say that our state association, the Illinois Public Transportation Association, which MTD is a member of and I'm a board member of, we also are involved in assisting primarily the city of Danville in getting to the point where they can accommodate this. But IDOT has transferred all the appropriate vehicles from, by the way, the name of that system was CRIS Mass Transit District, CRIS. But all the assets, the vehicles that CRIS operated, they have transferred the title to the city of Danville. So the city of Danville is just in the process of hiring right now so that they can accommodate all these additional trips. But I know that's well underway, and they're doing a really good job of picking up that slack.
Didn't realize it was across the county line.
Yes, it's all in Vermilion. Well, it's not exclusive to Vermilion County. It actually, CRIS was headquartered in Vermilion County, but they contracted out with McLean County and McLean and what was the other county?
Ford County.
McLean County and Ford County, so they did the transportation for all three of those counties. And I think that the city of Danville is looking at being a contractor for those other two counties as well. So I think that they'll get all that worked out. There are other rural transit districts. There's a really big one in southern Illinois called Rides Mass Transit District, and they operate in like 19 separate counties in southern Illinois. They'd be a great option for Ford and I think, is that right, McLean?
Chris participated in Champaign County back in when I was on the board in 2010.
They did, and I
think George would remember that.
But they shut down their Champaign County service, and that's when we started C-Carts.
Right.
So anyway, all that to say is they're making strides and they're doing a really good job, but there's still some way to go. The only other thing I wanted to mention was that in the budget that the board approved in June of last year, one of the capital projects in that budget was upgrading the communications, the data communications to our vehicles. And we've been working on that since July, and we are starting the pilot program of that. Right now, our maintenance department is installing the equipment on the pilot vehicle to test that. And that's going to be really great. And I just wanted to, kind of pump up our tech services and also our vehicle tech group in the work that they've done, because this will be great for our customers, great for operations, and there are a variety of reasons why, but it will allow us to be able to, on the fly, update when we put buses on reroutes, all the real-time information. In the past, that has never known that there was a reroute. And so if a customer looked up information at a bus stop that they normally go to, they would get bad information because the system didn't know that a bus was on a reroute. And so while we don't have that component available yet, having this communication method will allow us to implement that component from our service provider. And so that will be really good for them. My Phone a Friend group is going crazy to correct probably answers that I gave you that were incorrect. Let me just double check this real quickly. I saw Chris come up. Jay says that he can have our Special Services Manager, Sarah Love, provide a write-up that answers Alan's question, that insightful question about Medicaid users. So we'll get additional information to you for there. And it was Ford and Iroquois County that were the two counties that Chris was contracted out to. Yeah, Ford and Iroquois. So I got that same information from Michelle. So I have a team of people working to make sure that I give you the best answers. So yay, team. With that, any questions that you have through page 41, I would be happy to get assistance from my team to give you good answers to.
I would say using FirstNet for the bus cells is brilliant. It's they established it after 9/11. It's atrociously expensive for the government, but it exists for exactly what we're doing. And it should give us much better reliability on things like move-in day for students, game days. It basically puts us on a separate network that gets priority, which really, I mean, we are using these buses for public service. It's perfect for that, but that way you're not in there with everybody live streaming a concert, and people can still get updates on the buses. So that was a really good move.
Yeah, sorry, that was on my bullet points of things to mention. I got distracted by my phone going off. Yes, FirstNet is for exactly what you're saying. It's a cellular network for public safety agencies, and us participating in that puts us at a higher priority for service and reliability. So I agree. I think that will be really good. The other bullet point that I was going to mention, I got distracted, was that doing this allows us to have a kind of a parallel upgrade to the Wi-Fi system in our maintenance garage, which will increase the capacity of downloads, which will greatly enhance for maintenance and operations their ability to access video on the buses and that kind of thing. So again, that will just really improve efficiency for maintenance and operations. So thank you, Phil. That was insightful of you to mention that. All right, I'll let that joke die. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Next, we'll be assigning the chair and vice chair for the committees of the whole. First of all, the administration committee. Chairperson will be Alan Nudo. And also on the committee, the vice chair will be George Friedman. For the facilities committee, chairman will be Phil Fasella. and the vice chair will be Sharif Ullah. And then the Service Delivery Committee, the chair will be Laura Blyle, and the vice chair will be Mark Brown. Now we'll move on to action items. The first action item is to consider ordinance number 2026-4, annexing certain territory, Thompson-Hallback tracts. Any discussion?
I'll make the motion.
Yep, that'd be fine.
Second.
All right. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yes.
Friedman. Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes?
Motion carries.
Okay, our next action item is to consider the 2026 to 2028 leasing services agreement. Is there any discussion on this? Looks like Ashley's here to answer any questions.
You know, if I may, I know both Laura and Mark, maybe George, are all new since the last time we asked for board approval for a leasing agreement. So if you don't mind, I'll try to give you just an elevator pitch on it, just so that I know you've got the memo in front of you, but just to kind of give you a quick down and dirty reasoning for why we do this. This is how we satisfy our requirement to competitively procure leases. And so, you know, good government, you competitively compete in procurement, so you're not, no government agencies are just giving contracts to, you know, their friends and that kind of thing. And so this satisfies that, and it keeps the procurement honest, so to speak. The reason we do the leasing is we acquire capital assets like vehicles, small vehicles, that you would normally have to spend capital funds on. But if we don't have grants for those capital funds, then we spend local capital reserve dollars on those. So let's say we're buying a van to provide ADA service. That generally will cost $175,000. If we buy that, then that's a $175,000 deduction from our capital reserve account that local taxpayers pay for. But if we do a lease for that vehicle, then that lease, the debt service on that lease, the principal and the interest, is eligible as an operating expense. And that means the state participates in the payment of that lease. And so today, if we have a lease, IDOT pays 65% of that lease payment, and now the local taxpayers' money that goes into our capital reserve is only paying for 35% of that lease payment. So while we pay interest on that, the interest is not 65% of the payment. And so it is a good stewardship way to acquire these vehicles and let the state assist us in making that payment. And so that makes the local taxpayers' money go further. So that's my elevator pitch for that.
Any questions or comments? All right, thank you, Carl. Is there a motion to approve the 2026 to 2028 leasing services agreement?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blyle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yes.
Friedman. Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Our next action item is to consider architectural and engineering services for 108 East Water Street in Urbana. Do we have any discussion on this matter?
I would like, if I could, again, kind of do an intro here, because we're actually going to ask for a pivot from what we have laid out in our memo to you. A couple months ago, Trustee Blyle asked us to bring this to you as a discussion point to kind of get things going with the Urbana Downtown Development Project. We thought that was a really good idea, and so we prepared this memo with some questions for you to get some direction from you. But since then, a little side topic has cropped up in Urbana specific to the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission and their desire to more actively participate in the process. So we are happy to discuss this, but we actually want to, staff wants to hold off on contracting with a design team for now. Maybe we'll bring it back in a month, maybe 2 months, but we want to give the City of Urbana and the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission space and time to go through the appropriate process for them to resolve the questions that the commission has. And then when we have the answer to those questions, we will then come back to you again and we'll have a clearer picture of what the path forward will be. And I will say we're prepared to have a conversation about that aspect too. Ashley has been participating in the last couple of commission meetings, or I guess just the last commission meeting. So that's my rambling preamble, but we would like to hold off on this for now.
How much money did we spend making a fancy 3D model of this building for posterity? What was the amount there again?
The contract for the recordation services that were determined to be appropriate mitigation for losing that facility, that contract is $30,000. It's a not to exceed, so we haven't actually spent that full amount yet. That's currently in process, but we've actually asked them to pause that until this conversation has been resolved. We aren't confident that this process stops. We just felt like we wanted to give them a little time before we continue to proceed, so as not to put the district into any unnecessary risk if any barriers were put up.
Yeah, no, let's let them figure it out, and yeah.
Any further discussion?
Yes.
George?
Down at the bottom of page 75 is the acronym NEPA. I have no idea what that is. Sometimes I get lost in the acronyms that you guys bounce around every day, and you fail to explain it to us. What is that one?
That's a good reminder that we should spell those out more frequently. That's the National Environmental Protection Act that was passed in 1970. And so that's the review process that's required of MTD before any federal money is invested in a property. And that process has been ongoing for about 2 years for this particular property at 108 East Water Street. And it's expected to wrap up in April. And so the Historic Preservation Commission is invited to participate in that process, explicitly in the historic preservation aspect of that process, and that's how we are in this current conversation.
So what does the letter stand for?
National Environmental Protection Act.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can you remind me how much we spent on NEPA services for this particular bill?
That full contract was about $130,000, not including the additional $30,000 for recordation services.
Will there be a motion that the board would like to pause on this?
I don't believe that we need a motion for that.
Okay.
You know, you have the authority here, and if you disagree with staff, you could go ahead with the actions that are delineated on the agenda. But staff is asking you to hold off on that, and we'll bring it back to you at an appropriate time on a future agenda.
From a Robert's Rules point of view, I would suggest that there's no, if we don't want to take action, just bypass it.
I mean, I'm fine with that, but I want, you know, and I get it, the Preservation Committee is not the city of Urbana, but they've got to realize that we don't just like, we're not bleeding money here. I mean, we've spent $150,000 or something on this. If they want this in their town, there needs to be a path forward, and if they've decided that they want to somehow rehabilitate a building that's filled with mold and falling down and do something with it, then they need to figure that out. But I mean, we've got a project here. You know, there's other places we could work with. We could build a great transit center in Savoy and deal with people that are rational, but this is nuts.
Question?
Go ahead.
At whose timeline are we working on in terms of getting back to us? I think the board needs to recognize what Phil and George have brought up, and that is monies have been spent. And I think that, from what I understand, initially, the Historical Preservation Committee had an opportunity to participate in the NEPA process, but declined. Is that correct?
That is correct. So to be clear, the NEPA process itself, as well as the recordation services, those are ongoing. Those haven't necessarily been interrupted. So NEPA continues as is. It's still expected to be completed in April. But until that process has been completed, we can't enter into conversations with the city about purchasing the property. And so once the Historic Preservation Commission started discussing this and started discussing what their own authority was for preservation options, we decided we shouldn't advance any further until we are very clear that we can utilize the property for the intended purposes. So we have meetings set up with the city and also our other partner agencies in this project next week, and we will hopefully have more clarity imminently. But the NEPA process is ongoing and will continue.
I just would hate to see manufactured delays on somebody's part be recognized as you know, part of the process. And I don't know if we, as a board today, can say, get back to us by, or we need to make a decision by, but I think the next time you report back to us that we do come up with some solution as far as a timeline that we work with people to get this thing done, because it does have a greater good aspect to this whole community, as we've proven in Champaign.
I think we do have to give interested governmental parties a chance to weigh in on the subject. I wouldn't want to see that as postponing it for a long time.
Yeah, and we just view this as an effort for MTD to be collaborative and cooperative with the commission and the city. And I think specific to your question, Alan, the city will communicate to us and has been communicative with us about a timeline. So staff will keep you, I will keep you updated as we learn what the progression of that conversation is between the city, primarily between the city and the commission.
So just to piggyback off of Alan's question, did we have an overall timeline for this project that was originally stated? I just can't remember what that was, or if I was on the board at that point in terms of when things would get going and when it would be complete.
So because the NEPA process has to be completed before we can even discuss property procurement, we haven't put a timeline on it. We've just been pending this NEPA review, which I mentioned we're at the 2-year point this month. But generally those processes are expected to take more like 12 to 18 months. So this really has gone on further than we anticipated. So we do feel fairly confident that it will be complete in April. And so as long as these conversations with the Preservation Commission and the city are wrapped up by then, we'll proceed then with discussions about property procurement, and then we can still proceed with A&E as soon as we have clarity and the board weighs in on when they think that's appropriate.
And the other, sorry, real quick. The other thing, in addition to everything Ashley just said, is we don't actually have the money in place yet and budgeted to do the project. We are in the process of, which is our typical process, of lining up grant funding as it becomes available. So we are, that still needs to be done before we can actually like put shovels in the ground. What Laura asked for was, I'm not authorized to speak for her, but she basically said, well, that's cool, but can't we do this other part as we're trying to get money lined up? Can't we do the architectural and engineering? And that's what we were bringing to you to consider to do. But we just don't want to get crosswise in this case. So I think we'll do that in the relatively near future, but we don't want to be crosswise with this other conversation that's happening between the city and the commission. Does that?
Yeah, it just, from my perspective, it seems like we as MTD are doing everything that we should be and following a reasonable timeline, and it seems like there's a lot of roadblocks and, I guess, unnecessary hurdles being thrown into this when, you know, people I've talked to really would just like to see this move forward in Urbana. I agree with Laura that it's going to be a huge economic driver for downtown Urbana in terms of retail and everything else that kind of goes into it. So just my perspective on that.
I appreciate what you just said. I also am not authorized to speak for the commission, nor do I want to be in that role, but I think the commissioners would say they don't intend to be a roadblock. They intend to be a active participant in the conversation, and that's actually their role. And so, you know, I'm not authorized to speak for them, but I think that they would want that acknowledged, that they're not trying to be a roadblock. I don't believe they're trying to be a roadblock. They're trying to be an active participant.
Ashley, has that building been historically designated?
No.
So they haven't gone through the process of, I'm very familiar with historical preservation and working with buildings to get them designated historical. We've done, at least 10 buildings downtown on that basis in Champaign. I always thought the year was 1938 was the magic date, that any building before that was eligible. But then I found out yesterday through Carl and Amy that it's a rolling date. It's just any building that's 50 years or older. But no one has taken the effort to make that historically designated building yet.
That's correct. No one has put forth a nomination at the local or federal level for this particular structure at this time. It is just recently become eligible because it's just now, I want to say, 50 to 55 years old. And so, as part of the NEPA process, our consultants went through the record to make sure there weren't any nominations, to see if this building was listed on any sort of list of significant buildings or part of any tours or mentioned in the newspaper. But at that time, the building had already been closed for 6 years and was included in their capital improvement plan for demolition. And so we continued forward with the understanding that there would be no impact to losing that structure since it was already slotted for demolition. The State Historic Preservation Office came back and said, well, just because it hasn't been designated, it is eligible. And so for that reason, we want you to take some extra steps to make sure that
Makes sense.
everyone is good with losing this building and or understanding the impact of that.
That makes sense.
Any other comments or questions?
Alan, 1938 was a magic year. That's the year I was born.
You're historically preserved.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our final action item. It's to consider the approval of a cooperative purchasing agreement and bus purchase order. Any discussion here?
I have a peripheral discussion. This thing takes up something like 50 pages, 48 pages of this big packet we've got. I started looking through this stuff. The last 20 or so pages are simply a listing of all the details, what kind of flooring, what kind of switch types, what kind of seat mountings. We don't care about that. Why should we? Well, why should we print all this paper that's just going to go in the trash?
Makes
or in
it
the
very
recycling
transparent,
bins?
everything that goes into a bus.
Does anybody think we should continue to see that much detail?
Well, personally, I thought the conversation about tariffs in light of recent actions at the federal level was pretty interesting. So made for good reading here, and obviously I think everyone is trying to figure out what the impacts will be, but I think that that's also reflected in all the parts because there are potentially different tariffs for different parts, et cetera. So making up this bus is a very, this is a significant investment for our community. It's really exciting, but it also just makes you think, wow, how much of an investment each one of these vehicles is. So I actually was fascinated by it, George.
And Laura stole my thunder, which I brought up yesterday, and that is there's a figure of $325,000 plus in tariffs there, which the Supreme Court has struck down. And I asked if our attorney could insert in a clause that if such is enforced, that the contract we signed allows us to reduce the amount by the amount of tariffs that have been reduced by, because I'm sure there's no clause in here that says if the tariffs are not instituted that we have to pay it. If we're signing a contract, it's probably going to be for $9,505,762.79. And there's $325,000 and change in tariffs above that line. So, Mr. Attorney?
If I could just jump in real quick on this one. So this is pretty complicated, and Laura, you are correct that the tariffs are specific to different parts. And so the way that it is set up currently, so there's two things to mention. One, this is not our own individual contract with New Flyer. We're purchasing through the Washington State contract. And so that's great for several reasons, but it does limit us in terms of altering it in any way, because we're purchasing off of someone else's state contract. That does mean, however, that the state and all of the other buyers that are part of this contract have been participating in these conversations about tariffs and how they're applied and what flexibilities we have. So the way that it currently functions, I know that it looks like we're being charged up front, but in fact, the way that they charge tariffs is that because they don't have infinite space to store all of these, pages and pages of parts while they're waiting for our buses to go online. They order them the same month that these buses go into production. And so we will not be charged for tariffs until they know what tariffs are relevant to our bus. And so that is a separate charge that would come at the time they order the parts. So in other words, if there are no tariffs in place at that time, we will not be charged any tariffs. The number that they've provided in the quote is an estimate based on, recent past in terms of what they have charged, and then they added a contingency of an additional, I think it was 1.5%. And that's in order to give us space in our budget to make room for whatever it is that needs to be charged at the time of production. But again, if at the time of production there are no tariffs in place, then we won't be charged that additional tariff fee.
And how do you validate that? I mean, are they going to be providing documents of
Yes.
of each item and the tariff
Yes.
that was instituted and that they paid it, that they have a bill of sale that they paid it?
That's exactly correct. So
The contract still reads it that way. I mean, it's not just
Yes.
a verbal.
Right, it's not just a verbal contract, and the Federal Transit Administration has been part of these conversations as well, because most of these agencies purchasing these buses are paying with federal funds, and we require that documentation in order to get reimbursed.
Thank you.
And so that documentation is in place, their receipts, as well as the exact tariffs that correlate with each receipt.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything further? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the cooperative purchasing agreement and bus purchase order?
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Lyle,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Fasella,
Yes.
Friedman. Nudo,
Yes.
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, our next meeting will be an annexation public hearing on Tuesday, March 17th, 2026, from 5 until 6 p.m. at Copper Creek Church, 2202 Curtis Road, Champaign. And the next regular Board of Trustees meeting will be on Wednesday, March 25th, 2026, at 3 p.m. here at the Illinois Terminal, 45 East University in Champaign.
Before we adjourn, does anybody have any reaction to my comments about excessive paper in the board packet? Does anybody want to see it continue as it is?
I sure like all the details.
I'm sorry?
I sure like all the details.
I thought it was relevant for this particular purchase considering the amount of money and also just investment, but we do get electronic versions and have that accessible, so that's an option, correct?
I was afraid somebody might say that, Laura, because I don't want to create a lot of extra work for Katie, who takes all of the input that we have for an agenda, and I don't want Katie to have to create a version for paper and a separate version for digital. So if there's a desire to have this information in one form or another, I would ask that we don't make Katie do separate versions and that we just keep it in. We used to not include this kind of stuff in the board packets, and George's predecessor, Margaret Chaplin, she wanted to see these types of things, and so we started including them. We're fine including them, and we're fine not including them. We're not trying to keep things from anybody, but it is a lot, and some people will read it and some people won't. But my preference would be that we either have it or not have it.
I guess my point wasn't so much that we have different versions of the packet, just that if there was a member who preferred to not have a paper copy, that was a potential option.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to adjourn into closed session to consider salary schedules, that is, for one or more classes of employees, and discuss the potential purchase or lease of real property, followed by adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Blile,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Casella,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes?
Barnes.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, there will be no further action by the board. We will take a 5-minute recess and then begin the closed session.